In 2007, Steve Jobs stepped onto the stage to announce a magical and revolutionary new device that would change the way we used our phones forever. You know it as the iPhone. That same year, a survey showed that 84% of all high schools already had a cell phone policy on the books, with 76% of all high schools choosing to outright ban the devices entirely. Now, fast forward about 8 years, and in 2015, the Horizons Report, a report that predicts upcoming trends in K-12 education, predicted that there would be widespread BYOD policies where students brought smartphones or tablets to school to learn from, implemented within a year or less. Now here we are in 2018, and while some schools have taken that approach, other schools have doubled down on smartphone bans, going to great lengths to ensure that students are unable to use their devices during class. In fact, earlier this year, NPR ran a report on a school that had purchased locking pouches. Each day, when students would show up to the school, an administrator would take their phone, slide it into the pouch, and lock it up. At the end of the school day, the student could hand the pouch back to the administrator, who would unlock the pouch and return the phone to the student. In essence, the concepts behind smartphone usage in education have come to a standoff. There are two major theories. Theory number one is that students must give up their phones in order to get an education. In fairness, while this policy seems a little extreme in the way it's being painted, many studies have found that when students are distracted by smartphones, the result is dramatically decreased retention of material. As a result, well-intentioned and logical teachers and educators have determined that the phones must go. However, there is another option. Theory number two says students should learn to use phones in a way that enhances their education. From a leadership perspective, theory number one is what we might call transactional, while theory number two is transformational. The first policy focuses on giving up one thing in order to get another. The second policy focuses on completely changing a student's mindset. This presentation will argue that not only is transformational approach better suited for smartphone leadership, but that the traditional transactional approach may actually be causing problems rather than alleviating them. Now, that might seem hard to comprehend right now, but let me start you out with a quote. This is Max Bazerman, a Harvard professor, specializing in ethics. He said this: say you take people who are motivated to behave nicely, then give them a fairly weak set of ethical standards to meet. Now, instead of asking them to do it because it's the right thing to do, you've essentially given them an alternate set of standards. Do this so you can check off all these boxes. In other words, when we emphasize a policy rather than a principle, we change the question in the follower's mind, and that's a real problem for smartphone leadership. Let me show you what it looks like in real life. A group of researchers in Israel went to a preschool that was having a fairly common preschool problem. Many of the parents were showing up late to pick up their children. Each time they did that, one of the workers would have to stay after into their own time, and there was nothing in place to incentivize that worker to stay. So you can imagine the problems that caused. So after measuring how many parents were coming late for a few weeks, the researchers posted the following notice. Announcement: fine for coming late. As you all know, the official closing time of the daycare center is 1600 every day. Since some parents have been coming late, we've decided to impose a fine on parents who come late to pick up their children. The dollar amount of the fine was noted in the announcement, and it was placed on the door. The researchers fully expected to see a dramatic decrease in the number of late parents. Surprisingly, however, after a few weeks the number had dramatically increased to more than double the rate that it was before. One commentator explained the phenomenon this way. One reason most parents showed up on time is that they had a relationship with the teachers. The fine shifted the parents' decision from a partly moral obligation, be fair to my kids' teachers, to a pure transaction, I can buy extra time. There wasn't room for both. The punishment didn't promote good behavior, it crowded it out. Now notice that Pink explains that the problem arose when it became about a simple transaction rather than a moral issue. That's again the issue that we're facing with smartphone leadership. Let's look at one more example at a completely different preschool. This time, the researchers went out to study the preschool children themselves. They began by taking a look at what the children like to do in their free time, and not surprisingly found that the preschool children loved to draw. So they divided them into 3 groups. The first group was offered a reward, or an award I should say, for drawing a good picture. The second group wasn't offered an award, but when they drew a good picture, they were given one anyways. And the third group wasn't offered an award or given an award. The researchers ran the experiment and left for a few weeks. When they came back, they again asked the children to draw. But what they found was that the children who had been offered the award the first time were dramatically less likely to want to draw the second time. Now, that didn't happen at all with the students who were not expecting an award the first time, and certainly not at all with the students who weren't given an award at all. But it appears that the award had changed the question in the student's mind. Now, despite the policy's intention to encourage drawing, it had actually ended up discouraging the drawing. It was now about the policy or the award. Now, these studies aren't unique. In fact, a meta-analysis of 128 studies found that nearly across the board, transactional policies that used extrinsic rewards or punishments had the same effect. They ended up discouraging the behavior they were hoping to encourage. Now let's take a look at how that would look with smartphone leadership. Ideally, the question in our student's mind is the use of my phone going to enhance my learning? But when we switch to a transactional policy, the question now becomes, is the use of my phone going to result in me receiving a punishment? That's a transactional policy, while what we're looking for is a transformational policy. If we really want our students to change, we have to go towards theory number 2. Now, unfortunately, even if you're ready to jump ship and come over to the transformational approach, it's not that simple. There's a concept called functional fixedness. Psychologists describe it as the inability to look at an object and see ways to utilize it other than its traditional use. This functional fixedness gets reinforced each time a person uses a device in a traditional way or is told that a device should be used in a traditional way. This is a real problem with smartphones. There's several studies that show that teachers recognize the potential to use smartphones in the classroom, and they actually want to use them. They just haven't done it yet. But every day that we don't use them in the classroom, we reinforce that functional fixedness with our students. And every time we tell them to put them away, we reinforce it even more. In other words, the clock is ticking on our ability to change the ways that we use smartphones in education and transform our students' perception. Okay, so let's take a look at what it'll look like. There's a lot of different models that you can use for transformational leadership. We're going to use Kouzes and Posner's philosophy, I think is how you say their names, that goes through 5 steps, and I'll just briefly explain how they would apply to smartphone leadership. Step number 1, model the way. Yes, this means don't text and drive. Yes, this means don't be distracted by games in class, and make it about people and not about technology. But there's more than that. One study went to students and asked them what was frustrating to them about their parents' and their teachers' leadership with smartphones. And their response was that adults always tell them what not to do with their devices, but they rarely tell them what they should do. So what they're saying is, we want you to show us the right way to use them, not tell us what the wrong way is. Every time that a teacher gets up and demonstrates to a class, hey, we can look up information on our devices. We can use the calculator, or we can go in and use an app to learn things, or we can use videos from YouTube to learn. They not only demonstrate to their students a skill, a specific skill of how to use the device, but they help their students to overcome the functional fixedness in their minds that their smartphone device is only to be used for entertainment. Now they can start to see their device as an educational tool, and we're on our way to transforming the way they see things. So step number 2. Inspire a shared vision. There's a really cool study that was conducted several years ago where they took a group of college students that were working in a telemarketing center to raise funds for the university. And they tried to motivate them in two different ways. The first group was read stories before their shift that focused on the transactional nature of the job. For instance, how much money they were making and how it had impacted the students that had worked there before by earning that money. The second group was told stories that were designed to change the way they viewed what they were doing. For instance, they learned about students who had received scholarships from the fundraiser and how their lives had been changed through it. At the end of the study, they took the two groups and examined how much money each group had raised. And the group that had been in the second group that had been shared the stories about how it had transformed lives had raised more than double the amount of money as the first group, simply by having a vision of why what they were doing was important. So, from a teaching perspective, this might be as simple as reminding students each day why what they're learning is important and how it'll impact their life. By doing that, you can tap into their intrinsic learning motivations and help to transform the way that they're behaving in class. Step number 3, challenge the process. Keep in mind that the process isn't always wrong, but you'll never know until you ask the hard questions. I love this picture on the slide because the woman's really struggling. Transformational leaders ask the hard questions. For instance, is there evidence that our policy is actually making a difference? Do we really need 100% prohibition on smartphones? Or is an occasional text really that detrimental to my class? Or is it really not that big a deal? Is banning phones the best approach to prepare our students for real-world learning? The answer to the questions isn't really as important as the fact that the teacher is asking them. When we ask the hard questions, we get to real answers and real solutions. So remember, step number 3, challenge the process. Step number 4, enable others to act. Some of you might be at this point in the presentation thinking, oh great, let's just turn our students loose and let them use their phones however they want. Not at all. Transformational leaders enable others to act appropriately. For instance, a teacher might make the invitation to use your calculator to figure out the answer to this question, or text your parents or grandparents a question about this historical event, or I'm going to challenge you, find all of the information that you can in 2 minutes on this, and I want to see somebody get up and give a 1-minute speech on it. Or maybe you turn to your students and you say, I want you to teach the person next to you how to find information on their device. By doing this, we help our students to overcome their functional fixedness and give them a chance to learn how to use their device for educational purposes. Again, we can't just turn our students loose. We have to give them specifics. Finally, encourage the heart. There's a lot of different ways to encourage the heart, and it might look different for each teacher, but here's an example. If a student finds a good source on their device, praise them for it. Tell them what a great job they did. At the same time, you can give constructive feedback on when they don't do well. If they find a bad source, let them know that with a little more effort, they can probably find a good one, and give them some ideas of where they need to go. Again, enabling them to act more in the future. Now, this is a really brief overview of those 5 concepts. And obviously there's a lot more to it that we can't cover in 15 minutes. The truth is, transformational leadership is a lot of work, but in the end, there's no amount of policies, custom designed phone holders, or potential punishments that can solve the smartphone dilemma more effectively than a student who has a genuine desire to use their phone to better their education. And that's why transformational leadership with smartphones is the key to success. Thank you.